Welcome back and welcome friends to today's session of live lectures. For today's session we have with us in our studio Dr. Shruti Vip. Dr. Vip is Assistant Professor in Department of History in PGDAV College, Evening, Delhi University. Dr. Vip is about to discuss a topic of feminist movements and overview. Previously, she discussed history of feminism, where we have discussed different phases of feminism and different how women movement have evolved over a period of time. In today's session, we would be discussing different waves of feminist movements, first, second, and third, and theoretical perspectives of feminism. Today, if you have any question about this session, you can call us on our toll-free number in last 10 minutes of the session. For that, please note our toll-free number, which is 1800-110-430. Friends, let's welcome Dr. Vip and let's start with today's topic. We welcome you, ma'am, in our studios, and please tell us more about this topic.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity. So carrying forward where we left, we were discussing important implications of the feminist movement and how gender studies has evolved as a very important and an independent discipline in its own right. So feminism can be described as a political and a power movement as well as a literary approach which has affected almost all the disciplines, whether it is history or sociology or even economics for that matter, or political science. There is no discipline which is left untouched, and so feminist movement has a much wider perspective than the mere term feminism. The different phases of the feminist movement are also interrelated. We had started discussing with passing reference different phases of feminism in the last lecture. So just giving you a brief background, and from where one can really historically trace its origin, and it is in that background that I had mentioned a very important role that was played by Mary Wollstonecraft, who composed A Vindication of the Rights of Women, and it is regarded genuinely as the earliest and the foundation work of the feminist movement, as the work came out in 1792 during the course of the French Revolution. And in fact, this was a corollary to an earlier work. The earlier work was A Vindication of the Rights of Man. So the need was very much felt of coming up with a separate work on women, because the phrase rights of man did not really incorporate the demands of women, and women continued to remain as politically sidelined even after the revolution of 1789. Now a lot needs to be focused on the moral demand of equality, and this is what feminism was about, and not equality equality, but also a certain level of achievement in the field of education as well as work. So the first attribution of gender differences that can be ascribed to any particular phenomenon is of course socialization, and this is also that has been highlighted, that has been pinpointed by the feminist movements. Now coming to our discussion on periodization and different phases of feminist movement. The first phase of feminist movement that is supposed to have impacted a number of disciplines and also writing, literary trends, etc., can be described as the period from 1890s to 1960, and the focus of the first phase of the movement was largely on acquisition of rights, that is acquiring enjoying those rights that hitherto had only been enjoyed by men, such as the right to work, the right to employment, right to gainful employment, and most important, the franchise, the right to vote. And this largely was the result of a long drawn out series of struggle which started from the French Revolution itself, and there was then no looking back. However, it was only during the course of 20th century that this right ultimately was won over by women world over. Continuing our discussion on the first wave feminism, what was the theme and the idea that had triggered the debate? So, in this context, one can talk about the Enlightenment doctrine, the Enlightenment doctrine of human rights, especially as it was expressed in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, that came out in 1789, again during the course of the French Revolution. So, this was a very important document which spoke at length about the implicit rights of a citizen, and how these rights are, no one can deny these rights to men because they are the rights of citizens, and invariably it was considered that it is only men who can fall under the category of citizens. So, the Enlightenment doctrine of human rights sadly or tragically kind of overlooked the rights of women because probably they were not considered as human as men. Then the political aspect was equally important, and the first wave feminism raised issues about franchise, about voting rights, the ownership of property, inheritance rights, education, as well as the ability to run for public office. So, basically these were the kinds of different ways and means whereby some kind of equality, some measure of equality could be brought about between men and women. So, clearly speaking, the one important aim of first wave feminism was to bridge the gap that existed between men and women, now again one needs to go back to history and to discuss important perspectives as they emerged during 19th century. So, here a very important contribution was made by J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, whose time span was from 1806 to 1873. A very important work that was composed by Mill was The Subjection of Women. Which means basically creating controls over, establishing controls over women. Now, this work largely focused on establishing a right to vote and to hold political office as a very important and valid demand that was made on behalf of women, and most of the portions of this book were dedicated to undermining the popular stereotypes of women who are used to justify political exclusion. So, therefore, it occurred as a benchmark that a male author was talking about empowering women and giving them right to vote because they were they had equal right and they must be given that right. They should be able to exercise that right. Then another important personality that can be associated with this kind of a work was Harriet Taylor. The work, The Enfranchisement of Women, that came out in 1851 was equally very important. This was originally written by Taylor, and later it was republished with essays written by Taylor as well as Mill. So, both Taylor and Mill's essays were quite revolutionary in nature, and they created a benchmark of sorts in the sense that both were demanding that women be enfranchised, and they also focused not only on political political enfranchisement for women, but also for all those men who had been left behind. So therefore, the emphasis was more on universalizing the right to vote rather than limiting it to certain category of men, probably who were propertied or who had certain level of accomplishment. Basically, with this kind of rights-based perspective and approach, the next major demand was the right to divorce, and that women be granted this right. Again, this was coming from both these scholars. Now, having introduced you to a very brief kind of a historical overview, we would now talk about different waves of feminism, which have largely been divided into three important waves of feminism. The first wave, which started from the beginning of 19th century, and by 1830s, from 1830s onwards, the main issues that were raised from time to time were regarding the abolition of slavery, as well as accomplishment of women's rights, achievement of women right, attaining more and more rights for women. And a very important development that took place during the first half of 19th century itself was in 1848, a women's rights convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York, and this was quite a motivating movement for women, especially in the developed countries. And by 1920, the 19th Amendment guaranteed women the right to vote. So women in America, they got right to vote as a result of this amendment, and a lot of this struggle goes back to this convention that had taken place in 1848 in Seneca Falls, and this was primarily with the view to enfranchise women. So definitely the growing industrialization, urbanization and creation of a working class among women played a very important and instrumental role behind this kind of a struggle. But at the same time, one needs to take into account the important role that was played by the working class movement and the socialist movement, which had really matured both in Europe and in countries wherever industrial development was going on. Now coming to the second wave, this has specifically been assigned to the years between 1960s to 1990s. So during this period, especially between 1966 to 1979, there was a heightened feminist consciousness. The movement was largely linked to the civil rights movement that was going on, and most of these civil rights movements had begun in 1950s. And the key issues were, of course, bringing to an end anti-discrimination policies, as well as a demand for equal privileges that should be enjoyed by all the sexes, and not only the male sex. So therefore, this was again path breaking, and it evolved from the first phase. While the first phase was more about bridging the gap between men and women, the second phase was a step forward, and it was rooted in the demand for civil rights. And this demand was no way only limited to women, but it also incorporated the just demands for the marginalized sections of the society. Now, here an interesting poster that you can see on your screen is for 1932 Soviet poster for International Women's Day. As you can see that how women were refusing to be tied to the kitchen, and they were demanding an end to kitchen slavery. And in fact, the very fact that it is the woman who is holding the red flag, and as a symbol of revolution and is calling for a complete turn of events and not only rhetorically talking about socialism. Now, the second wave of feminism from 1960s to 1990s definitely saw important cultural and political developments, and there was an issue that was raised about the inequalities in these spheres, and it also pointed out that how different kind of inequalities were kind of interrelated, and it was largely concerned with the other issues of equality also that were related to the discrimination. So, any kind of discrimination on the basis of sex, caste, color, creed, etc. was brought to light. And a very important essay that and a statement that comes to my mind regarding the second wave of feminist movement was the personal is political, and this largely represents the second wave feminism. This was the title of an essay that was written by Carol Hanisch. And now the very statement that the personal is political, what does this mean? This basically means that whatever is going on in the lives of women, it has great impact on the overall personality, and it is as important as the political demands. That is, merely by giving right to vote is not going to change things unless and until we change what is happening within the families, what is happening in the domesticity, and how the domestic lives are being experienced by women. So, therefore, the private sphere is as important and as valid as a sphere of inquiry as the public sphere of politics, the public sphere of governance, administration, right to vote, franchisement, etc. So, therefore, now this sums up the very gist of the second wave of feminism, that is, you have to bring about change in the lives of women. The personal experience has to be transformed, and newer horizons can emerge only if the personal lives of women are not only at peace with themselves, but also greater recognition is given to them as humans and as individuals in their own right. And women's liberation was the slogan for the second wave movement. Now, by women's liberation, it very well meant liberation within society, and family was the most important unit of society. So, ranging from the personal, that is the family, that is the home, domestic life, to the wider network of schools, universities, offices, colleges, etc., then there was no looking back. Now, from 1990s onwards, one can talk about the third wave feminist movement. The third wave feminist movement seeks to challenge the second wave's essentialist definitions of femininity, which according to them overemphasized the experience of upper middle class white women. So, therefore, the third wave feminist movement was even richer because it tackled the complex issues of internal divisions within the category of women. That is, all women are not alike, neither do they suffer similarly. Their sufferings are different depending on their place in the globe, whether they are situated in the developing country or they are situated in the developed country, and even within a country to which particular category they belong, whether they belong to the richer sections of the society or they belong to the poorer sections of the society. And of course, for a country like India, caste, community, religion, language, all these are very important categories. So, therefore, one major allegation that was levied on the second wave feminist movement was that the movement so far had focused only on the upper middle class white women. So therefore, the realization that we needed to take into account diversity, different categories of women and different categories of exploitation, and also past histories and past experiences. So then the question that was raised was that how valid is the demand that largely caters to only the richer sections of society, and it is raised by the richer women in society. So therefore, those demands cannot be valid, and neither can that struggle be considered as universally appealing. So therefore, what one can really associate the third wave feminist movement is the post-structuralist interpretation of gender and sexuality, which is central to much of the third wave's ideology. So the third wave feminists often focus on micropolitics, and they challenge the second wave's paradigm as to what is or is not good for females. So therefore, they challenge the generalizations, they challenge the attempt to usurp the movement in the name of what is good for women and what is not good for women. So they questioned the existence of the very category of women, and they pointed out that one needs to take into account how micro politics is at work, and how there is a need for a regional understanding of the problematic, and any kind of generalization would only benefit the rich and the powerful, and would only cater to the needs and requirements of the middle class women. So therefore, with this kind of theorization, I would now like to take into account different perspectives that have evolved. So now our focus would no more be on chronology, it would no more be on division into 2 or 3 waves of feminism. Rather, we would be talking about what are the different theoretical perspectives that have been actively promoting the cause of feminism, and in what ways one school of thought is different from another. But the common theme that runs behind most of these theoretical perspectives is the issue of socialization, and the most important theoretical perspective which has taken up the issue of socialization is, of course, the school of liberal feminism. According to the school of liberal feminism, socialization is the origin of gender differences. What do you mean by socialization? It basically means how children are brought up in a family, and what do they observe in and around them, how they are brought up, what are the role models that are there for them, and basically how both male and female children are not only brought in this world, but also what are the grooming tactics that are followed by the parents, by the teachers, and by the elders. So therefore, socialization is a very important entry point that has been taken care of by the scholars of liberal feminism, and the goal of this school of thought was, of course, to bring about gender justice by challenging and by questioning the socialization practices that had been followed for so long. And of course, some very important scholars and activists that are associated, that can be categorized in the within the category of liberal feminism, are Mary Wollstonecraft, whose time span was from 1759 to 1797, about whom we have just discussed how her very important work vindication of the rights of women was very important, and it can be considered as the starting point for feminist ideology. Then another very important scholar was J.S. Mill from 1806 to 1873, and Harriet Taylor Mill from 1807 to 1858, and of course Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminine Mystic in 1963. So these were the some of the examples of the kind of literary works which talk about this approach directly or indirectly, that is the approach of liberal feminism and how it is socialization process that ultimately leads to the creation of male and female identities, that is either masculinity or femininity. However, liberal feminism has its own a set of criticisms, and there are scholars who have not really accepted the logic that has been put forward by liberal feminism. So, I shall now be taking a break, and we will be continuing with our discussion on the critique of liberal feminism in due course of time. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, friends, for joining us for this part of the lecture. We'll meet you again after a short break. Before going on to the break, we would like to tell you, if you have any questions regarding this session, you can call us on our toll-free number in last 10 minutes of the session. And for that, please note our toll-free number, which is 1800-110-430. We'll meet you after a short break. Welcome back, friends, to today's session of live lectures. Before going on to the break, we were discussing about feminist movements and overview, and we'll be continuing this part of the lecture. If you have any questions regarding this part of the lecture, please, you can call us in our last 10 minutes of the lecture on our toll-free number, which is 1800-111-430. Let's welcome Dr. Webb once again, and let's start with the topic. We welcome back you, ma'am, friends, and please start with the topic.
Thanks a lot. So, continuing our discussion on the critique of liberal feminism, the claim that women can become like men if they set their minds to it. This is a major critique that has been put forward by scholars, that probably not all women want to become like men. So, women have a right to exist in their own ways and in their own kind of identity. So, why should that be overlooked, and the only aim should become that they should become like men? So, this is a major critique that has been developed, and the claim that all women should want to become like men, to aspire to masculine values, again raises a big question mark on the very issue of socialization, that if one is challenging the way socialization has worked so far, and the way a gap has existed between men and women. So, the same logic applies to the fact that the socialization should not also be such that both of them are similar in nature and behavior, something which is just not possible. So, the next important theoretical perspective that one can talk of is Marxist feminism. Marxism, as you all know, is based on the category of class. So, any kind of analysis is done on the basis of material factors and class analysis, and class accounts for women's status and function in society. So, according to the Marxist scholars, it is basically the reason that women are devoid of a class status, and they are devoid of private property, they are devoid of material modes, that they have a poorer status in society, and they conform to a certain kind of functions. They keep on performing those kind of productive functions only, which are largely in the range of reproductive functions. So, the kind of monogamous marriages which are largely rooted in the institution of private property have largely deprived women of their rights, and therefore the deprivation has continued. And the family, according to Marxist feminism, is a microcosm of society's larger class relations. So, if you take into consideration the way a family functions, where most of the importance is given to the male members, and the property also is inherited by the male members, so the similar kind of discrepancy continues beyond the family, that is in schools, then later on in offices, then later on in public spaces. So, therefore, Marxist feminists claim that the family is the replica of the larger society's class relations. So, both the public and the private spheres, they display certain kind of class relations which benefit men as compared to women. Then socialist feminism is again a more maturer theoretical perspective, which has taken into account the fact that it is both class as well as gender that intersect. So, according to them, it is not only class analysis which is sufficient, or the material factors that are sufficient, or only a discussion on material rights or property rights cannot really bring about a clearer discussion on ideologies and discrepancies. Both patriarchy and capitalism must be analyzed. So, socialist feminism has taken into account the intersection both between the economic factors, that is capitalism, that is industrialization, that is liberal ideologies, and any kind of activity which is going on for profit, and how the market principles are allowed to have a free run. So this is what capitalism is all about. So while the Marxists focus only on that particular material factor, that is capitalism and its resultant malpractices, socialist feminism takes into account both patriarchy, that is rule by the male members, control by the male members, as well as the impact of capitalism, and how both these forces work hand in hand, and they work hand in glove in order to bring about a much lower status for women in society. Then another important theoretical perspective is that of radical feminism. Now the very term radical, which means a school of thought that is far more change oriented, according to this, the male power and privilege are viewed as the basis of social relations. So therefore there is lot of research and questioning regarding the issue of power and privilege. It is not only that the economic factors are important or only the patriarchal relations are important, but what is important is the issue of power, the issue of knowledge, and the issue of privilege. And the goal, of course, was the abolition of male supremacy. And in order to bring about this change, the most important institution that was considered as worth talking about was education, it was knowledge, and the focus was on establishing women centered beliefs and systems, and a change in the value systems that existed in various institutions, because unless and until the value systems are transformed, only bringing about change in economy or polity or morality was just not possible, or even if it would have been possible, it would not have really brought about the desired results. Now another interesting theoretical perspective to study feminism has been multi-racial feminism, where the emphasis is not on generalization, that is there is no more talk about women, women as a class in themselves who are subjugated. They question the very category, the very term of women, and according to them the focus has to be on the intersections of race, class, gender, caste, religion, etc. So therefore, a very valid question that has been raised by multiracial feminisms is that how does the experience of domination shape the life experiences of people of color? So therefore, race is a very important entry point for this school of thought, and according to them, the marginalized races world over experience different kinds of domination, and that needs to be studied accordingly. That needs to be studied within the frame of a particular reference of time and space, and any kind of generalization would not really do justice to their grievances. So therefore, there is a lot of importance that is given to the issue of human agency, that is human beings as active and creative and not as dormant, who can all be clubbed within the same category because of these different divisive forces which have robbed the marginalized sections of a place under the sun. Then a very important and quite contemporary school of thought that one can talk about is the postmodern feminism. The postmodern feminism takes into account the differences among women on the basis of class, race, and different categories that I have just mentioned, like language, region, religion, and different and a whole lot of other barriers, and they specify the category of women rather than the universal women. So they question the existence of anything like a universal woman who has been dominated by men. They say that not all women have universally been dominated by all the men, rather there needs to be a micro level study and an inquiry about the kind of discriminatory practices that have been followed over space and time, and the separate issues of colored, third world, lesbian women have been raised by these scholars. So therefore any kind of ghettoizing or all kind of women into a particular framework is not really considered as a valid inquiry by postmodern feminist scholars. Then another interesting field of inquiry and theory has been the queer theory, where the issue of sexuality and sexual identities is viewed as socially constructed. So the way someone views himself or herself as male or female largely depends on the kind of social construction that they have gone through, the kind of observations that they have been experiencing or they have been observing since they were born, and there is a lot of focus on how sexual identity is performed and specific meanings are constructed behind. So therefore the way a male is supposed to dress and the way a male is supposed to conduct himself in public has largely been decided right from the beginning, and all logical males are expected to follow that, to toe that line. So therefore according to queer theory, one needs to question the very existence or universal existence of masculinity and femininity, because according to them there exists gray areas which neither kind of conform to the male nor to the female kind of upbringing, and it is these gray areas that must be discussed, that must be given freedom to develop, and also sexual identity cannot really be considered as given. Rather, it is largely cultivated, constructed, and therefore it is also artificial. It is not something that is natural or which cannot be changed, or one cannot deviate from the norm. So therefore queer theory is all about deviation and accepting that deviation and accepting diversity. Then coming to the next important perspective, and that is cultural feminism. By this perspective, the idea that is conveyed is that there are fundamental differences between men and women's differences should be celebrated. So here now we see there is a complete difference from the first phase that I had discussed with you, that is the phase of liberal feminism, where the entire focus was on bridging the gap between, bridging the difference between men and women and making both of them equal and similar to each other in all the parameters. But now the debate has progressed to the extent, and it has matured to the extent that scholars have accepted that there are differences, there are biological, social, cultural differences, and these differences must be accepted, celebrated, and rather they should be more empowering. These differences should be more empowering and recover the lost or marginalized women's works and traditions, as well as create a culture that nurtures and supports their experiences. So this is another very important milestone that has been achieved by these scholars to talk about whether one is talking about history or one is talking about literature, one is talking about writings. There is an attempt to kind of revisit and to kind of revise what has been handed down to us as history, and to question the given historical framework and the given historical discourse, and to rewrite history from the perspective of gender, and to explore as to what was the role played by women during various phases, because so far history has largely been his story. So, the very term itself shows that history is implicit in men's experiences, the way they have contributed, the way they have fought wars, the way they have ruled. All this has been described as history. So these scholars, they point out that one needs to go back in space time, and one needs to revisit, re-question and revise this, and this is what revisionism is all about. Revisionist scholars, that they refuse to accept history as has been handed down in the form of written tradition, and rather take recourse to the oral tradition, and take greater interest in the so many folk tales, fables and moral stories, etc., which were probably composed by women, and which probably are storehouses of knowledge. And if one attempts rewriting history, then all some very interesting facts can emerge, which can also give an insight into women's experiences. And only when we incorporate these women's experiences can one talk of an enriched history and an enriched literature. So therefore, cultural feminism takes into account all these various facets of writing. Then another very interesting theory that is related to psychology, the discipline of psychology, is Freud's psychoanalytical theory. The key to this theory is the process of identification, that is, the process by which a person internalizes a set of behaviors, attitudes, morality, characteristics that are exhibited by people around them. So this has specially been used, this theory has specially been used to explain that how children unconsciously model the behavior of elders. They model the behavior that is displayed by those around them in the family, and this is how gender role socialization is largely basing its its existence on this Freud's psychoanalytical theory, that in order to understand as to why men and women behave in certain ways, one needs to go into their minds, and those minds are not biologically framed, rather they are framed as a result of the behavior, they are framed as a result of the way they are aping their elders. So therefore, this again is a very interesting and a very valid field of inquiry. Then talking about gender role socialization, another very important theory is the social learning theory. This is quite relevant in the field of education also. In this, the most important idea that has been generated is that we imitate same-sex individuals through observational learning. So here reinforcement is the key, that when something is reinforced time and again, it becomes part of your behavior, and it starts impacting your learning process also. So therefore, the reason that the girl students are interested in particular kind of subjects, and they are not interested in science or mathematics based subjects right from the beginning, this aspect has been studied by scholars, taking into account the social learning theory. Then another important theory is the cognitive development theory, that is, the child is an active participant in his own development, because the way the brain of a child develops again is largely influenced by the kind of behavior he or she observes in the surroundings. So therefore, it is not as if the child is passive participant, rather the child is an active participant, but definitely what is going on around the child definitely impacts the end result. Then now carrying on our discussion on gender and culture, a very important contribution has been made by the media theories, and media theories have also contributed in not only analyzing the technicalities of feminist ideologies, but also in showing a new way of understanding as to how certain principles are imbibed over a period of time, and then ultimately it becomes culture, it becomes part of the whole gender experience. So one important theory is the cultivation theory, where there has been a lot of focus on understanding the role that is played by television as a homogenizing agent in culture, which enables the world, which enables everyone to view the world in a similar manner. So therefore, the way any particular advertisement impacts the audience world over is for all of us to understand and realize. Similarly, the way a news channel or the way a debate kind of influences our experiences and our understanding of the world politics and economics is also for all of us to understand. Then the reflection hypothesis, which in this, reality shapes what we see in the media. So anything that we see in the media largely becomes reality for us, and it starts impacting not only our psyche but also the way we perceive femininity and masculinity. Then another interesting theory is the role learning theory, where viewers internalize what they see in the media, and then it becomes part of their personality, and then it starts influencing the way they behave in the larger society, they behave in the public sphere. Then the organizational theories have also of media have also taken into account how women and people of color are absent from the power positions where ideas and images are produced. So a survey, any kind of survey if is conducted on the kind of newsmakers and directors or in the production houses, then the number of men far surpasses women, and also the number of males or of not of marginalized sections far surpasses those who are from the marginalized sections of society. So therefore, particular kind of ideas and images only are replicated, they are produced, they are justified, and they are accepted by the audience. Now, coming to the issue of the sociology of knowledge. Now, the sociology of knowledge is a valid inquiry because it deals with the issue of social construction of ideas, that is, how ideas are generated over a period of time, as well as how through knowledge, that is how through education, through educational institutions, a certain set of ideas are generated, and then again they are perceived in the form of femininity or masculinity. So what we know is largely shaped by the socio-historical context in which we live, and our socio-historical context has largely been shaped by media. Now, having discussed these various theories and theoretical perspectives, I shall now come back to our main topic, and that is the issue of women and the issue of women in history. But before we discuss the issue of women in history, it would be interesting if we talk about the contemporary times, that is the issue of women in present times. If we talk about what are the main issues related to equality and justice, certain themes that are as valid today as they were during probably 18th century are the issue of reproductive rights, domestic violence, the issue of maternity rights, maternity leave issues, equal pay, sexual harassment and violence. Now, one has to again be specific here, as I just shared with you, postmodernism philosophy, that one cannot really talk in general terms about girls in the world or women in the world, because the experiences of the developing world are completely different if we are talking about in terms of women as compared to the developed world. So, here I would be focusing on the girls in the global south. Now, in developing countries, the birth of a girl causes great upheaval for the poor parents when there is barely enough food to survive. So, right from the beginning, the child is exposed to a strainful relationship and meager family resources, and this tendency then carries on forever. But the monetary drain of a daughter feels even more severe, especially in regions where dowry is practiced. The developing world is also not only full of poverty, but also disease-stricken families who see their daughters only as an economic burden. And this attitude has largely resulted in the widespread neglect of baby girls in Africa, Asia and South America. So, therefore, this particular problem is rampant in these parts of the world. So, if we talk about girl deprivation, it does not really make sense for the developed world, because over there, because there is absence of poverty, there is no dearth of resources, this kind of weighing the resources and not spending enough on girl education or girl health, these kind of problems do not exist. So, one has to specifically target areas, the underprivileged areas and the developing world when one is talking about these issues. Then sex selective abortions are even more common than infanticides in India, again a problem that has been increasing time and again. The gender ratio across India has dropped to an unnatural low of 927 females to 1000 males due to the infanticide and sex based abortions, and the problem is again not coming to a halt, though a number of programs have been started in order to bring an end to this rampant practice, and in a lot of stringency and stringent laws have also been put in place. But then citizens do find ways and means, and the problem is continuing. Rather, it is spreading even in the affluent sections, it is spreading even among the rich and the affluent sections of Indian society. Then the common theme that runs behind the differential treatment is that in many communities it is a regular practice to breastfeed girls for a shorter time than boys, so that women get pregnant again with a boy as soon as possible. So, in order to deal with the issue of hormonal imbalance, which does not allow women to become pregnant, girls are deprived even of breastfeeding, and as a result girls miss out on the life giving nutrition which stunts their growth and weakens their resistance to disease. So, having discussed all these factors and how the girl child is facing lot of discrepancy in the developing world, and that is why it is very valid and logical to study this kind of a topic, I shall now bring the discussion to a halt and resume in near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Webb. And thank you all for joining us for this session of live lectures. Friends, if you have any question or suggestions regarding today's session, you may write into us at our email ID, which is info.cec@nic.in. For any updates related to the channel or the courses being offered by CEC in the form of massive open online courses, you may visit our FB page, Facebook page, which is CEC-UGC, and you can also visit our Twitter handle, which is CEC-MOOCs or CEC-UGC. For the updates of the lectures, all the lectures being telecasted on our channel have been uploaded on our YouTube channel, which is CEC-UGC. Do subscribe to the channel and you'll get the latest updates of all the lectures. Thank you for joining us for this session, and we once again thank you, Dr. Webb.
Thanks a lot.